For some context, I'm a 24-year-old guy, and a couple of years ago I was between jobs and struggling hard to make rent. To keep my head above water, I started driving for DoorDash. Because my days were usually spent chained to my laptop submitting job applications and doing draining interviews, I mostly dashed late at night, usually between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. The pay was slightly better with peak bonuses. The roads were completely empty, and honestly, I enjoyed the quiet isolation of my car. I live in a mid-sized town in the Pacific Northwest. If you know the area, you know that once you get about 15 minutes outside the city limits, the landscape changes drastically. It gets incredibly rural, incredibly fast. The suburbs just stop, replaced by heavy, towering pine woods, winding two-lane roads, and long, desolate stretches with absolutely zero streetlights. It was late October, and the weather was miserable. It was freezing cold and pouring down that heavy, relentless PNW rain, the kind of blinding rain that makes your windshield wipers basically useless, smearing the street glare across the glass. It was around 1:15 a.m. I was exhausted, freezing, and just about ready to call it a night and head home when a notification pinged on my phone, illuminating the dark cabin of my Honda Civic. It was an order from a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, 2 burgers and a milkshake. What caught my eye, though, was the payout. It was unusually high, almost $30 for a 6-mile drive. I rationalized it immediately. I figured it was a massive tip from someone with late-night munchies who didn't want to drive in the storm. I told myself I could do this one last run, pocket the cash, and go to bed. I picked up the food without any issues. The diner was completely dead, smelling faintly of old grease and bleach, manned only by a deeply tired cashier. I grabbed the heavy paper bag and the sweating milkshake, got back into my Civic, and swiped to get the delivery directions. The GPS took me straight out of town, heading down Route 9. This is an old, poorly maintained state highway that cuts directly through the dense, sprawling pine forests. After about 10 minutes of driving in the pitch black, with nothing but the deafening sound of the rain hammering against my roof, the GPS chimed, telling me to make a sharp right turn onto an unnamed dirt road. I slowed down to a crawl, squinting intensely through the waterlogged windshield. Sure enough, there was a narrow, jagged clearing in the tree line. There was no street sign. There was no mailbox. There was just a steep, muddy path disappearing instantly into the dark woods. I hesitated, my foot hovering over the brake. My gut was telling me this was incredibly sketchy, but I had already driven all the way out here. $30 was $30, and I needed it for groceries. I took a breath, turned my wheel, and eased off the pavement onto the dirt road. The mud was thick and slick, and my little Civic immediately struggled for traction, the tires slipping slightly in the ruts. The trees on either side were wildly overgrown, heavy, wet branches scraping aggressively against the sides of my car, sounding like fingernails dragging across a chalkboard. I drove at barely 5 miles an hour for what felt like an absolute eternity. The claustrophobia of the woods was suffocating. The GPS kept cheerfully insisting, "Continue for half a mile," but the road just kept winding deeper and deeper into the wilderness. Finally, the app chimed its bright, artificial tone. "You have arrived." I hit the brakes. I was sitting in a small, circular dirt clearing, but there was no house. I looked around frantically, my high beams cutting through the sheets of heavy rain. There was absolutely nothing out here but tightly packed pines and the old, rusted-out husk of an abandoned single-wide trailer off to the right. It clearly hadn't been lived in decades. The metal roof was severely caved in, choked with moss, and every single window was shattered. I pulled out my phone, the screen blindingly bright in the dark car. I had exactly 1 bar of service. I checked the delivery instructions, hoping I had just missed a detail. "Leave at the red door. Do not knock. Just leave it and go."
There was no red door. There wasn't even a functioning building.
A prickle of cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I hit the central locking button on my driver's door immediately, the sharp click echoing in the quiet cabin. I decided right then and there that I wasn't getting out of the car. I was going to cancel the order, take the hit on my completion rating, and get the hell back to civilization. I grabbed the gear shift, threw the car into reverse, and checked my rearview mirror to back out. That's when my heart completely dropped into my stomach. About 50 yards behind me, perfectly blocking the only narrow path out of the dirt clearing, was a massive, dark pickup truck. Its headlights were completely off. The only reason I could see it was its hulking silhouette blocking the faint, stormy moonlight filtering through the canopy. Total, paralyzing panic set in. How did I not hear them pull up? Had they been following me down Route 9 with their lights off the entire time? I sat there, frozen, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, staring unblinkingly into the rearview mirror. For a full, agonizing minute, nothing happened. The truck just sat there in the dark, idling quietly, trapping me in the clearing. Then, slowly, the driver's side door of the heavy truck groaned open. A tall, incredibly broad-shouldered man stepped out into the pouring rain. He didn't have an umbrella, he wasn't wearing a raincoat, he was just wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled tightly over his head, obscuring his face. He closed the truck door and started walking down the muddy, rutted road, straight toward my car. And in his right hand, held casually down by his side, he was gripping something long and solid. The faint glow of my taillights caught the metallic sheen of it. It looked like a heavy tire iron or a crowbar. Every primal survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to move. I slammed my palm on the horn, a long, blaring warning, desperately hoping the sudden, aggressive noise would startle him or make him hesitate. He didn't even flinch. He didn't break his stride. He just kept walking through the mud, his pace slow, steady, and terrifyingly deliberate, getting closer and closer to my rear bumper. My mind raced. I knew my lightweight Civic wouldn't survive a ramming match against that massive truck. I'd just total my radiator and trap myself for good. But the woods surrounding the circular clearing were dense with thick brush and heavy pine trunks. I had exactly one option and a 3-second window to take it. I shifted hard from reverse into drive. I cranked the steering wheel as violently as I could to the left, aiming the nose of my car directly into the narrow gap between the front of his parked truck and the rusted trailer, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The front tires spun uselessly in the thick mud for a terrifying second before finally catching a rock or a root. The Civic lurched forward with a roar, skidding wildly past the abandoned trailer. I drove the right side of my car straight into the heavy brush, forcing my way past the front of his parked pickup. Thick branches whipped and scraped violently against my windshield and passenger windows. The right side of my car loudly and sickeningly crunched against the heavy steel front bumper as I squeezed through the impossible gap. As I forced my way past, I looked out my passenger window. The man in the hoodie was standing mere feet away in the rain. As I accelerated past him, he lunged toward the back of my car and swung the heavy metal object with massive force. Crack! He shattered my passenger side taillight with a deafening, explosive sound, showering the mud with red plastic. I didn't stop. I fishtailed back onto the muddy path, hit the paved, slick surface of Route 9, and absolutely floored it. I pushed the Civic to 80 miles an hour in the pouring rain, my hands shaking so violently I could barely keep the car in the lane. I didn't stop driving until I reached the blinding fluorescent canopy of a well-lit gas station back in the city limits. I threw the car into park, locked the doors again, and called the police from the parking lot. They took my statement and sent a cruiser out to the GPS coordinates, but by the time the officers arrived at the clearing, the truck was long gone. They called me back an hour later to confirm they found pieces of my shattered red taillight plastic embedded in the mud, along with a fresh, deep set of heavy-duty tire tracks blocking the exit.
When DoorDash support finally investigated the next morning, they confirmed what I already suspected. The account that placed the order had been created that exact same night using a prepaid debit card and a fake name. I never found out who that man was. I never found out what he intended to do to me with that crowbar if I had actually turned off my engine and gotten out of the car in the rain to look for a red door. But I deleted the app and quit DoorDash the very next day.
I deliver food in a major East Coast city. If you've ever done gig work in a crowded metropolis, you know that apartment complexes are the absolute bane of your existence. Confusing, labyrinthine layouts, a total lack of parking, and broken intercoms make every drop-off take 3 times longer than it should. You spend half your shift just trying to figure out how to get into a building. But what happened to me last winter goes way beyond a typical gig economy inconvenience. It genuinely makes my blood run cold whenever I think about it. It was around 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in mid-January. The city was freezing, covered in that depressing, gritty black slush that accumulates on the shoulders of the roads. I had been driving for 8 hours, the heater in my Corolla struggling to keep up with the draft coming through my windows. I just wanted to hit my quota and go home. Then I got a ping for a late-night fast food order. The drop-off location was an older, brutalist-style high-rise on the rougher, industrial edge of town. As I pulled up, my headlights washed over a massive, looming concrete block that looked more like a Soviet-era prison than a residential building. Most of the windows were completely dark. The streetlights on the block were entirely blown out, leaving my headlights as the only illumination. I parked out front, threw my hazard lights on, and grabbed the greasy paper bag. I walked up to the heavy glass double doors, pulling my jacket tight against the biting wind. The instructions in the app were simple. Apt 4B, the lobby door is unlocked. Elevator is broken, please take the stairs. Tip will be under the mat. I pulled on the handle, and true to the instructions, the heavy lobby door gave way with a screeching groan. The lobby itself was incredibly depressing, looking like a space the city had completely forgotten about. Dim, yellowed fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly glow on the peeling linoleum floors. It was dead silent. There wasn't a security guard, a front desk, or even a fake potted plant, just a row of heavily rusted mailboxes, some of them pried open and hanging by their hinges. I found a heavy steel door marked stairwell in faded red paint and pushed it open. The smell hit me instantly, a suffocating mix of stale cigarette smoke, damp concrete, and something faintly sour like rotting garbage. I started the climb. First floor, nothing but the hollow echo of my own boots hitting the concrete. Second floor, one of the overhead lights was flickering violently, making a low, aggressive electric buzzing sound that vibrated in my teeth. Third floor, the air felt noticeably colder here, as if a window had been left open to the freezing night outside. As I turned the landing to head up the final flight to the fourth floor, I heard a sound that made me stop dead in my tracks. Slam. It was the heavy metallic crash of a fire door echoing from somewhere in the darkness above me. Someone had just entered the stairwell. I stood completely frozen, holding my breath, just listening. I expected to hear the scuff of shoes coming down, maybe a resident heading out for a late night smoke, or someone taking out their trash. But there were no footsteps, there was no rustling of clothes, just absolute suffocating silence pressing down from the floors above. I tried to brush off my paranoia. I was just exhausted, freezing, and over-caffeinated. I forced my legs to move, continuing up the last flight of stairs, and pushed open the heavy, reinforced door to the fourth floor. The hallway was incredibly long, narrow, and unnervingly dark.
The carpet was a faded, stained geometric pattern that squished slightly underfoot. Most of the overhead light fixtures were either burnt out or missing their bulbs entirely, leaving long, deep stretches of shadow between the apartment doors. I squinted at the tarnished brass numbers, 4A, 4B. It was the second door on the left, tucked away in one of the darkest pockets of the hall. As I approached apartment 4B, my hair on the back of my neck stood up. I noticed something immediately wrong. The door wasn't fully closed. It was cracked open about 2 inches, revealing a sliver of pitch-black darkness inside the apartment. There was no ambient light from a TV, no glow from a street lamp filtering through a window, just an impenetrable, heavy blackness. I stopped a few feet away, clutching the paper bag like a shield. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded weak and way too loud in the dead-silent hallway. "DoorDash?" No response, just the hum of the building's ancient heating system somewhere in the walls. I looked down at the threshold. There was no welcome mat. The instructions had specifically said the tip would be under the mat. My lizard brain was screaming at me that this was a trap. "Delivery?" I said again, a bit louder, stepping back slightly.
Then, deep from inside the ink-black apartment, a voice answered. It was a man's voice, very low, gravelly, and almost a whisper. It didn't sound like someone who had just woken up. It sounded like someone who had been waiting. "Bring it inside. Just put it on the kitchen counter." Every alarm bell in my head went off simultaneously. It goes against every single safety protocol and basic human survival instinct to cross the threshold into a stranger's unlit apartment in the middle of the night. "I'm sorry, sir, I can't come inside," I said, trying desperately to keep my voice from shaking. "Company policy, I'll just leave it right here by the door." I bent down, placed the greasy bag on the stained carpet, and started to back away slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on that 2-inch sliver of darkness. As soon as the bag touched the ground, the voice spoke again. This time it sounded much closer to the door. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was demanding, sharp and laced with anger. I said, "Bring it inside." I didn't say a word. I turned around and started power walking back toward the stairwell. I didn't want to run and make it obvious I was panicking. I didn't want to trigger a predator's chase response, but my heart was hammering furiously against my ribs. I just needed to get the other side of that heavy stairwell door. I reached the handle, yanked the fire door open, and slipped through. As soon as the hydraulic arm began to swing the heavy door shut behind me, I heard the terrifying, undeniable sound of apartment 4B being violently thrown open. The doorknob crashed into the hallway drywall with a sickening crack. I didn't walk down the stairs. I launched myself down them. I skipped 3 steps at a time, grabbing the rusted handrails to physically swing my body weight around the landings. Right above me, I could hear heavy, frantic footsteps thundering down the concrete stairs. Whoever was in that dark apartment was chasing me. They weren't just walking fast, they were fully sprinting down the stairwell, their heavy boots echoing like gunshots in the narrow cinder block shaft. I burst through the ground floor door into the lobby, nearly taking it off its hinges. I sprinted past the rusted mailboxes, threw my entire body weight against the glass front doors, and spilled out into the freezing night air. I scrambled to my car, ripped the driver's side door open, and threw myself inside. I slammed the door, hit the lock button, and jammed the keys into the ignition, starting the engine in one fluid, adrenaline-fueled motion. As I threw the car into drive and hit the headlights, my beams illuminated the front of the building. I looked up at the glass double doors of the lobby. Standing just inside the glass, staring out at me, was a man. I couldn't make out his facial features in the dim, sickly light of the lobby, but I could see his massive silhouette. He wasn't banging on the glass or yelling. He was just standing there,
perfectly still, his hands pressed flat against the foggy glass, watching me drive away. I sped off, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the steering wheel straight. I pulled into a well-lit gas station 5 miles away and immediately called DoorDash support to report the incident. They put me on a maddeningly long hold, transferred me to their trust and safety team, and investigated the account. When the representative finally came back on the line, what she told me cemented this as the most terrifying night of my life. The account had been created that same day using a prepaid card and a fake name. But the real horror came the next morning when support followed up with the building's property management. Apartment 4B was entirely vacant. It had been empty for over 6 months due to severe water damage, and there was no active electricity running to that unit. Whoever was standing in the pitch black of that apartment wasn't waiting for a burger. They were waiting for whoever brought it.
I'm a 22-year-old female college student. Because my class schedule changes constantly, gig work is pretty much the only way I can consistently make rent and pay for books. I've been delivering food for about 2 years now, and I've developed a pretty strict set of rules for my own survival. I usually stick exclusively to the affluent, well-lit suburban neighborhoods. I avoid sketchy areas at night. I carry a heavy-duty pepper spray on my keychain, and I always share my live GPS location with my roommate before I start a shift. I thought I was doing everything right. I thought I had outsmarted the risks of the job. But what I learned is that sometimes people use the app itself to stalk you, weaponizing your job against you. It started on a Wednesday night around 9 p.m. The shift had been slow, so I was happy to accept an order from a local bubble tea shop. The drop-off was to a massive, expensive-looking house at the very end of a sprawling cul-de-sac in a pristine, quiet subdivision. The kind of neighborhood where the lawns are perfectly manicured and the streets are dead silent after dark. The instructions in the app were standard. Hand it to me. I pulled my car into the wide, sweeping driveway, grabbed the iced drink, and walked up the paved walkway to the expansive front porch. I rang the doorbell and waited. I stood there for about 2 minutes, shifting my weight in the cold air, but nobody came to the door. I rang it again. Nothing. The house was completely quiet. I tried calling the customer through the app, but it rang twice and went straight to a generic voicemail. Annoyed and wanting to move on to my next order, I was about to just leave the sweating plastic cup by the door and take a picture. That's when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. The front of the house featured these large, custom floor-to-ceiling windows right next to the double doors. Standing slightly behind the heavy living room curtains, mostly concealed in the deep shadows of the unlit room, someone was watching me. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but they weren't moving to open the door. They were standing perfectly still, just staring out at me on the porch. It seriously creeped me out, but I rationalized it. I figured it was just an awkward, socially anxious customer who had changed her mind and didn't want to interact. I set the drink down, walked briskly back to my car, and drove off, shaking off the uneasy feeling. 2 nights later, on a Friday night, I got another ping. It was from a completely different restaurant, a fast food place a few towns over. The order was bizarre, a single, small side of French fries. When the GPS routed me to the delivery address, my stomach dropped. I recognized the winding streets immediately. It was the exact same large house at the end of the cul-de-sac. This time, the instructions had been updated. Leave at door. Do not knock. Honestly, I was relieved. I didn't want to deal with the weird watcher in the window again. I drove up, parked on the street this time,
walked quickly up to the porch, set the greasy paper bag down on the welcome mat, snapped my mandatory photo, and immediately turned around. But as I was walking quickly down the driveway, my hairs on my arms stood up. I couldn't help it. I glanced back over my shoulder at the house. Again, in the exact same window, someone was standing behind the curtains, a dark silhouette, perfectly still, watching me leave.
By Sunday night, I was actively hoping my radius wouldn't pull me back toward that neighborhood. But sure enough, around 10:30 p.m., my phone chimed. It was an order for a single bottle of soda from a nearby gas station. The payout was weirdly, incredibly high. It was a $20 payout for a 2-mile drive, meaning they had added a massive tip up front, and the address was the house in the cul-de-sac. I honestly sat in the gas station parking lot debating whether to decline it. I told myself I was just being paranoid. It was a $20 tip for 5 minutes of work in one of the safest zip codes in the county. I picked up the cold bottle of soda and drove toward the subdivision. When I arrived, I noticed the instructions had changed again. They read, "Do not come to the front door. The porch light is broken. Bring the order down the side path and hand it to me at the back wooden gate." When I pulled up to the curb, I saw that the front porch light was indeed off. In fact, the entire property was plunged into total darkness. To the left of the sprawling garage, there was a narrow, unpaved gravel path that led tightly between the high privacy fences of this house and the neighbor's property, disappearing into the pitch-black backyard. I sat in my idling car for a long time. The street was dead silent. I gripped my steering wheel, staring at that yawning pitch-black gap between the houses. Everything in my body, every instinct, every alarm bell was screaming at me not to go back there. Why order a single $2 bottle of soda? Why offer a $20 tip? Why insist I, a female driver working alone late at night, come down a dark, secluded side path to a back gate? I made a split-second decision. I wasn't going to do it. I decided I was just going to leave the bottle at the edge of the garage door, take a terrible rating, dispute it later, and get the hell out of there. I stepped out of my car, leaving the engine running and my driver's side door wide open. I held the bottle of soda, walked just a few feet up to the edge of the concrete driveway, and set it down near the garage. As I straightened up to pull out my phone for the photo, I heard a sound that made the blood freeze in my veins. Crunch. Crunch. It was the heavy, unmistakable sound of a work boot shifting on gravel and dead leaves. But the sound wasn't coming from the back gate. It wasn't coming from the dark, narrow side path between the houses. It was coming from the thick, decorative hydrangea bushes lining the very front of the driveway, directly between my parked car and the street. I froze, absolutely terrified. I slowly turned my head. Crouching behind the tall, leafy bushes, just a few feet from where my car door was open, was a man dressed entirely in dark, non-reflective clothing. The horrifying realization hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't in the house. He had never been in the house. He had been waiting outside in the freezing cold, hiding near the street, anticipating that I would blindly follow the app instructions and walk down that dark, narrow side path to the back gate. Because I had stopped at the garage and refused to go to the back gate, I had blown up his trap. I was standing between him and my open car door. We made eye contact for a split second in the ambient moonlight. I saw the distinct metallic glint of something heavy in his right hand, though my brain couldn't process exactly what it was. I didn't scream. I didn't even think. Total, primal adrenaline took over. I sprinted the 5 feet to my open car door, threw my body inside, and slammed the door shut, desperately hammering the lock button.
Just as the locks clicked, a heavy fist pounded violently against the driver's side window. I finally screamed as the man slammed both his hands against the glass, his face contorted in absolute visceral anger. I threw the car into reverse and punched the gas. My tires squealed against the asphalt as I backed out of the cul-de-sac so fast I nearly jumped the opposite curb, throwing the car into drive and tearing out of the neighborhood. I didn't stop until I reached the brightly lit parking lot of the local police precinct. I ran inside, shaking uncontrollably, and gave them the address, my app logs, and the description of the man in the bushes. When the police went to the house that night, they discovered the horrifying truth. The wealthy older couple who actually lived in the home had been out town on a cruise for 2 weeks. They had absolutely no idea food was being delivered to their house. The man had been using their empty, dark property as a decoy staging ground. He had ordered small, cheap items just to deliberately lure a female driver to a secluded, wealthy location that wouldn't raise red flags. The silhouette in the window those first 2 times, it wasn't the homeowner. It was him, having broken into the house, watching from the inside as I dropped the items off. He was studying me. He was studying my car, my routine, and my willingness to follow his app instructions. The police never caught him. DoorDash banned the prepaid burner account he was using, but that brings me zero comfort. I still check my rearview mirror every single time I drive at night, and I absolutely refuse to deliver after sunset anymore, because I know he's still out there, and I know exactly how flawlessly easy it is for a predator to order a victim right to a doorstep.